All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm not going to make this too long, but I am going to kind of go through the new features that I've been playing with that if you want to automate imaging are pretty slick. So let me go back to sharing. I think that's it. Is that right, everyone? Hopefully you can see Nina. I'm not going to, I did something back in April where I went through all these menus and things. So I'm not going to do that tonight. If anyone has a question about something, I can do that afterwards. But let me go up. So the things that we can talk about here are all these buttons on the side are kind of how you navigate the program. One is the Sky Atlas. So you could type in something here like M42 and hit search, and it'll find it and show you its altitude during the night and all this good stuff. There is, so let me do this. So something you can do is say, send that to the framing assistant. And this is something I was doing earlier, but there, it went out on the internet and downloaded image of that area. And then over here in the camera parameter, you can see it knows my camera size, and I've told it my pixel size and focal length. So this box, this is the size of my ASI camera on my C8. So if I wanted to frame something, I could put it there or something like that. And it has the coordinates. If you have the ability, you can rotate it. Either you can use plate solving to figure out your angle and keep adjusting it until it's right or something, so you can adjust that. And if you're really fancy, it'll do mosaics. So you can do 4 panels and cover it or whatever. So this is not what I'm going to talk about tonight, but I'm just showing you this is kind of the features of Nina that I find really useful. But what we're going to talk about is the sequencer screen. And I sent out some links to more info on this if you want to look into it more. But traditionally, when you took images with Nina, this might be familiar to someone who's used APT and other programs. Up here you have all these controls. Do you want it to start guiding? Do you want it to slew to the target? You can control when it autofocuses, all these toggles. Here's your target coordinates and everything. And then down here, you just start putting in your sequence requests. I know APT does it this way. So I could say I want to take one frame for 10 seconds using, the L filter. And I also want to then take, one with R and so on. And so you could set all this up and hit go, and it would start just taking images of that object, and it works pretty well. Something down here you can do is you can turn on whether or not it will do an auto Meridian flip. You can tell it to turn on the cooler when it starts and unpark. And then when it finishes your last thing, do you want it to cool the camera and park the mount? And you can have multiple targets. So if we went back up here, here you can just say add target to sequence, and you can say add it to the simple sequence. So you can see it added a Great Orion Nebula up here. And then let's say later in the night we wanted to do M66. And I could say add that target to the sequence. And so what would happen is it would do all the frames for this target. And when it's done, it would switch to the next tab and image all of the Orion Nebula and then hit M66 or NGC 3627. And it would just go through this. And then when it's done, it would do everything at the bottom. And so that's called the simple sequencer. That's in the current version of Nina. The one I'm running here is you can see it up here, 1.11. It's a nightly build, so they don't make any claims about how stable it is. I've been using it about 3 nights with no problems, but if you want something that is going to run stably, you would want to use 1.10, which have blessed as the stable release.
Hey, Mike,
All right.
can I ask a quick question real quick?
Yeah, of course. Please, anyone interrupt me if you have a question.
If you have a couple of targets, can you tell it, I want the second target to start at 1 a.m. on the dot, even if there are still images to go in the first target sequence?
Right. So no, the only thing you can do is up here, you can say delay start by seconds. So there is no control over timing or anything.
Okay.
It's
So
just,
you got to plan how many images you put
that's right.
in the target very carefully. Okay.
Right. And what you're bringing up is a good point and a good reason, you know, why this new sequencer that over here was designed. So this one's much different. Over here on the right side are all kinds of actions. You can see things like cool the camera or take exposures. If you had a dome, change your filter wheel position. So these are like, think of these as Lego blocks that you're going to build up the evening out of. And I'm going to sort of build a simple sequence here to show you all these things you can loop. So for example, you want to, let's do Andy's example first. So the first thing you would do here is go back to the Sky Atlas. And let's just do M42 because I know that's up. I'm going to say sequencer. We'll just say a basic. That's going to be too complicated. I don't want to do that. Let's see. If I put it here, will this give me the option? Yeah, it's okay. So I'm just going to put it in target. All right. So what these things are, I didn't want to get into yet. These are called templates. So like you can define, I want this many LRGB images and put that in a template. And then when you click on the target, it just generates it. So if I go here to the targets, it has this one. If I drag this over, it's going to be okay. So I just did a lot of things at once I didn't want to do yet, but okay, so let's start up here. So there's this thing that is called a deep sky object sequence. And you can see the tooltip there, but basically everything in this sequence tool works on containers. So this is a big container on the outside. And if you open it, you'll see the first thing in it is the target. So everything inside of this container will be operating on this target. And I happen to populate that from the other screen. You could just type in coordinates here if you wanted. Put in your rotation. So it filled in a lot of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all this because I didn't want it to make it that complicated. So this is what a basic deep sky object sequence looks like. You define a target, and then you have three things down here. You have triggers, loop conditions, and instructions. Triggers are things like that it checks for after every exposure. So those would be things like, let's just look up. So like Meridian flip. You can see how when I drag it here, you get that red thing that says add a trigger. So this is now going to check after every exposure inside of this container, whether it's time to do a Meridian flip. You can also do, you could also put a trigger in here that every 5 exposures do a dither. This is a little awkward and not the most transparent thing when you first look at it. It took me a few nights to get the hang of it, but so here you can define triggers for things that you want to happen. Usually it's either flipping or dithering, or you could do, sorry. All right. Let's see. There was a, where's the autofocus? There's one for, I thought there was one for autofocus. Yeah, here we go. So you could say something like autofocus after every 5 exposures, or autofocus every 30 minutes. So you can add all kinds of triggers in here that you want to happen while things are happening below. So I'm just going to leave that one in there. Loop conditions would be things like, I want you to take pictures of M42 until dawn, or 11 o'clock, right? And here it's telling us how much time's left. So after every exposure, it's going to check the loop condition, and if we've hit this time, let's just say right, 23:16. When we hit this time, it'll fall out of this container. Otherwise, it'll just keep doing the instructions over and over again. So what can we do for the instructions? Well, for this case, let's just do something simple, which is anyone see take exposure? Oh, there it is. All right. So instructions are things like take an exposure. So we could just say until 23:16, take 30-second exposures. So what it will do is it will come through here and take the first exposure. It'll check, is it time to meridian flip? Is it this time yet? Nope. Then it will go back in there and take another exposure. And so you could just set it to loop forever. Am I going too fast, or everyone getting the basic idea?
No, you're good.
Okay. So obviously you can put all kinds of things. You can do other things for your rules. Let's see. You can do things like you can define a local horizon. So you could say, wait until this target is above the horizon, and then so it'll sit here and block. It won't now, obviously, because it's risen, but if it hasn't, then it'll just sit here and block until it moves out. Now, you can see up here in this picture, it shows the altitude of M42 versus time. And then this kind of gray translucent thing is my horizon. And you can define your local horizon with a simple text file. It just has the azimuth and the altitude for your horizon. And I figured that out a long time ago. So it's actually smart enough. So this side over here on the east is my house because it's on my back deck. So it's pretty high. And then over here are just trees in the backyard. So it's smart enough that it would wait until something popped out, and then it would go and start imaging it. Now, you might have noticed I'm missing a few things. One thing is there's nothing in here to tell it to actually move the telescope yet. So to do that, you would add center. So what this will do is it looks at the coordinates that you defined in this container, and then it will go slew and plate solve to center that target in there. And then the next thing I would need to do, you can type things in here. I need to switch the filter, right? I need to tell it what filter I want to do. So let's say we're going to take one R frame. So now we've defined something that will meridian flip if it needs to. It'll run until a certain time. When it first starts up, it's going to wait until the object's actually visible before it starts. Then it will center the target and switch the filter and then take exposures. And then it's going to keep doing this loop until this time. Well, obviously we have a problem because we don't want it to recenter the telescope after every exposure.
I was just about to ask about that.
Right. So there's lots of ways. This is very flexible. There's lots of ways you can handle that. One would be they have something called a sequential instruction set. So you can have another set of instructions inside of this set of instructions, and you could put these on the outside, pull this loop into the loop conditions for this, switch your filter up there. All right, so this is kind of like inheritance and like object-oriented language or something. So everything in here inherits all the triggers from the container outside. So after every exposure, it's still going to check this trigger. But because we made this new loop here, this is just going to keep looping until this time. But after every exposure, it's still going to check this stop condition and this meridian flip. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, you have the exposures in the block where the loop is, so only the exposures are going to be looped.
Right.
The center and switch filter should only happen before that loop starts.
That's right. Now there's a simpler construct in all of this. For all of these things, you can delete something here. There's something called smart exposure. So this one's a little nicer. You can say, I want to take 15 exposures with the R frame that are 15 seconds each, and dither every 5 frames. So this is actually composed of a lot of these instructions internally, but they've kind of wrapped it like a macro, if that makes sense. And so now I still need my loop condition. You could still put a loop condition on this, right? If I could find it. There we go. Let's do something different. Let's just say we're going to do that 2 times, right? Or until the object, where's the other one? Yeah. Or until the object is less than 45 degrees. 45 degrees. All right. So now this is going to run this. So even though I said do, 15 exposures, between every exposure, it will still check all these things. So it would do 15 exposures. And then if all the conditions are still true, it will, because it says do 2 iterations, it would do another 15. But while it's doing those iterations, if for some reason it got below 45 degrees, it would drop out of this and go down to the next set of instructions. And if there are none, then you see this sequence end area, it would run whatever you put in there. So you could put something like, when it's done imaging, you could have it park the scope and let's see, warm up the camera, right? And it would just sit there until you went out there in the morning and turn everything off, I guess, right? So that's
Mike, in this thing you've set up, will it check the altitude after 15 exposures and then again after another 15, or does it check that altitude every
let me say
exposure?
that again. I'll be clear. So this smart exposure, it still checks between exposures. I think they implemented that as a macro. So it's actually the atomic operation is not this big thing. It's every exposure. So it would check 15 times, and then it'd be useless otherwise. But yeah, it would check.
It's just a little confusing to see the loop for 2 iterations on the block, and then the loop for the altitude be per exposure.
It's almost like a programming language, but the syntax doesn't quite make sense, right?
So this would do 15 exposures, right? It'll loop. There's a loop. There's kind of an internal loop here doing 15 exposures. But for every one of those internal loops, it still checks all these conditions. Each of those 15 internal loops. I hope I'm being clear. This is the same as if I did, take exposure and here. Well, take exposure and loop 15 times, right? And then I wrap this in iterations of 2. Yeah, I think I'm making this obfuscated, but the whole point of smart exposure is just so you don't have to, it wraps a lot of things into a nice macro for you. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to set these things up. And that's kind of the only problem I have with it at the moment is once you set up a night, like let me load what I set up for last night. All right. So this is what I had to do last night. First, I just turned off tracking and cooled the camera. Made sure the guiding wasn't running. And then I waited until 7 o'clock. Then I turned on tracking, and then I had it do, I had several objects planned for the night. And each of these objects, it was pretty much the same thing internally, right? I didn't understand if you think, like if you use the smart exposures, you don't have to turn things like autofocus and guiding on, it does all that for you. But this was my internal instructions for taking RGB of this one target. And then the next target is exactly the same thing all over again, right? Well, as I was trying to figure out how to do this, if I realized I missed, like I forgot to put the autofocus in between changing filters, I had to go back and change every one of these to have the autofocus. So that seemed kind of clunky. So I'm going to show you, I kind of figured out today a better way to do all that. Another thing that's kind of clunky is I don't know how to actually delete everything other than sit here and just pound on the delete key. I couldn't find a button to clear the current sequences out, which is a little strange. I feel like I must be missing something, but why don't we just set up a quick...
There's a big trash can at the very bottom of the screen.
Yeah, that's so you can drag things and drop them on it.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I know. That's what I thought. But so, you know, again, the advantage here is that you have a lot of control. For example, if you wanted to image an object for 3 hours and then hit the next object, if you just said, let's do 3 hours of exposures, well, you probably know from experience that it takes more than 3 hours to get 3 hours of exposure time because of all the focusing, the dithering, Meridian flips. You know, it doesn't ever work out exactly right. So this gives you that ability. So what I did was I made a simple sequence script that is kind of a wrapper. It defines what I want to happen at the beginning of the night and what I want to happen at the end of the night. And so I load that in first. And then let's just go do, let's just do M42. So I'm going to throw that in to my sequencer, and I'm going to use, I have this simple RGB template that I defined earlier. All right, and that template is this whole thing starting here. When you define a template, you basically define one of those deep sky containers, and then when you right click and put the object in it, like I just did, it'll fill in the object part. But my my template basically goes through and waits till the object is up, then it centers it, sets a filter to L, because down here I set a rule. One of the triggers is when you change the filter to do autofocus. And I knew I wasn't going to be shooting L down here, so I just put it on L so this trigger will happen. I still have a Meridian flip trigger. And then my condition, my default is just loop until the thing goes below your local horizon. I'm going to get rid of that. We're just going to loop until we do these. And we're just going to do 3R and 3G and 3 B filters. And then we're going to fall out and have it just finish. So again, this is just going to take some RGB pictures of M42 and then shut everything down for the night. So what you do here is you just hit start. So it shows you with a check mark what it's done. So it stopped the mount, it unparked it. Oop, telescope not connected. Let me check that real quick.
I use the PodH Driver a lot too.
Yeah. All right. So I'm sorry for that. Let's start over. So everything's connected now. So when I hit start, okay, I didn't get those error conditions. So the mount was connected this time. It is nice. It will, if you have an operation that would use a piece of equipment that's not connected, it does put that exclamation mark. I just wasn't paying attention. All right. So it's cooling the camera, and it'll block on cooling the camera until it reaches your target temperature. So we'll just have to sit here a second. Up here in the instructions, I didn't talk about these others. So this is basically a sequence for one target. This is just a sequential list of instructions. I showed you that before. This parallel one, you can put a bunch of things in there and they all run at the same time. So if I'd use that, it would be unparking the mount and cooling it at the same time. And it would stay inside that container until everything finishes. So it wouldn't really save me any time because we're really waiting on the camera to cool up. But they've kind of thought of a few different things with that. I'm going to switch back. One thing I didn't show you here is if you click on this curve, it'll show you the time and altitude for the object that you're interested in. So I use that by putting in a few objects, and then I can just go along here and say, I'm going to do this till 10:30, and then pick an object that I could pick up at 10:30, and then I'm going to do it till, whatever time. They don't have, okay, so now we're in business. So now it's slewing. Over here, this is kind of the dashboard for Nina. Over here, it's showing us the operations it's doing. So right now it's slewing the telescope to M42. This little window that popped up happens when it's trying to center on an object using plate solving. So we're still slewing. You can see the telescope. It's almost to M42. So it's going to stop here a second and do settle for a few seconds. You can kind of follow what's happening down here. Now it's going to take a exposure. If you've used SGP or any other program that kind of does a plate solved centering, you're familiar with this. So there it is. I think we're pretty close. Oh boy, now what?
This is A-step. It's okay.
No, it's failing for some reason.
Oh, really?
I ran this for like an hour earlier and it was working great.
Well, that's one of the.
But you weren't recording then.
Yeah. Let me stop it. Let's see. So I go back to the sequence. Well, so this is one thing that compared to other solutions, as far as I know, it doesn't really have this figure. They haven't implemented this part yet, which is what happens if something fails. Something like, so this isn't complete. So I'll just start it up again. Something like Voyager is very robust and will go through, and if for some reason this didn't work, it will kind of go back one step. Okay, let's try the slew again. Let's try, try a few things. As far as I know right now, Nina doesn't really do that kind of error recovery yet. Okay, so this time it's solved. Down here it's saying that it's not on the target yet, so it's doing another slew. And it'll settle, take another picture. I anticipate they're going to add that kind of stuff to Nina. Obviously, they're just, it's not a company; it's a bunch of volunteers, so they're building this up pretty quickly. But right now, you still probably need to be around to watch things. Okay, so that succeeded.
You might could build something like that, Mike, with the loop construct. Maybe do a loop on centering, but have a trigger that kicks it out if one of them was successful, for example.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I'll be curious to ask the guy in March, Dale, about that. So you'll see that we finished that. So we jump down here to Smart Exposure R, and since I had set the filter to L, when it changed to R, that triggered the rule I had. I don't know if it shows it here, but I had a rule that if you change the filter to autofocus, and so it popped up this autofocus window, and it's going to go. It's going to construct a V curve. This only takes about 2 minutes or so, so I will just let it run. But it's pretty much like what SGP does, and you can. Voyager has a mode where it works this way, where it makes an entire V curve and fits. This one fits. I think I have it fitting a hyperbola to it. You can see it's already tried to fit it, but we're not. It fits it every time you get a new point. So with this setup, I always get this weird little quirk. I get this one little kink every time. I don't know what causes that, but these red bars are its estimate of the error, and these dots are the size plot the size of the star. You can kind of see here in the background, each exposure, the stars are getting a little tighter because we started out of focus and then we're going to move into focus and then go back out of focus on the other side.
Mike, do you know if it's measuring the stars across the whole frame or picking a particular one?
Yeah. Let's see. Here. Camera. Oh, autofocus settings. Oh, well, that's not helpful. So here you have these things. You can set a outer crop ratio and inner crop ratio, which is a little quirky that I have them both set to 1. I don't know what that does. I'll have to read about that because the tooltip's not. Oh, here we go. Maybe I can get a tooltip now. No. I think it's this window's kind of grabbing focus, but you can set it. So let's say you wanted to focus between 30 and 70% away from the center. You would set these to the inner and outer crop ratios to make an annulus that it would look at the stars in.
Okay. Well, it also says use brightest end star. So it looks like it's taking the top 50 in this case.
Yeah, I set that up earlier. Okay. So yeah, those are, okay. So now it's at the furthest out of focus and it's moving towards the best focus position down here. All right. So it sort of snapped into focus there. So it's going to, let me clear this out. So it says down here, it started up guiding and it's taking that first 15, you can see the guiders running over here. And, oops, sorry. So it's over here, it's going to take 3 exposures. So see, it's already started next exposure while it was computing the star size. And it's going to shoot through these. Here's, the guiders are all running. This is PhD2. So let's see, it's taken, over here it says it's taken 2 out of 3 of the exposures. Okay, it finished. So now it's switching to filter. I'm going to see what happens if I kill this. It might be bad, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully it'll, nope. I was hoping it would skip that step. I didn't want to sit through it focusing again. Let me see. Let's see. Yeah, it's still focusing. So let me kill the sequence here. And so what it was going to do, I'm going to get rid of these, but it was going to refocus for G and take 3 pictures and refocus for B and take 3 pictures. So I'm going to get rid of these 2 and then just hit play again. Everything with a check mark next to it, it's already done. So as far as it's concerned, it's done everything. So it's going to drop down here. It turned off tracking. It's parking the scope right now. If we go look at here, and we can see the scopes moving around to the north. It's parking. I have it parked pointing due north. So this is what would happen at the end of the night, or whenever it's finished all your targets that you had set it up for. It'll work its way around the north. And then it did that. So then the last thing it'll do is it turned off the camera cooler. And it'll, so, you don't need to have your camera running all night. If you had a dome, you could put like closed dome shutter in there. There's all these things that unfortunately, I don't have a dome, so I don't have to worry about. You can do other things like there's the, where's the slew? Yeah, you can slew to an Alt-As position. So you could have it sit there instead of doing all this. You could have a wait till sometime in the morning, slew so you're pointing at the right part of the sky to do sky flats at the end of the night. And then there's this thing called train flat exposure. So you could say, I want 20, R flats. And what this will do, I don't have a flat. Oh, that's interesting. I thought it would work with the sky. It may not. I've used it with that. I'd have to test this out to see if it would still work, even if you don't have a flat device. But what it will do is, if I show you the flat wizard, here you can say, I want you to take 15 flats with the R filter, and then you tell it, I want the brightness to be 32,000, and it can be from 29 to 36,000, and it'll take an exposure and then figure out how long an exposure you need with the current brightness of your flat panel or the sky or whatever. And then it will go through and take 15 flats using that auto exposure for that one and move to the next one and so on and so forth. So my thought was you could probably do it here, do the same thing. Just do your R. You'd have to figure out which one of these to do first because, because of the way the sky is, you probably have to do blue first and red last or something. But you could have this happen at the end of the night, and then it would park and warm the camera up. If you were going to do that, like I said, you would do a wait. Where's the weights? Oh my goodness, here we go. Wait for time. Let's just say we knew this would not be the right time to do it, but let's just say we had it wait for dawn. Well, what I would probably do before that would be after it finished imaging everything, you could say turn off tracking. So the scope would just stop tracking and just sit there, wait till whatever time you determine you need to start taking sky flats, and then it would run through the sky. You would put in a, where's this is pretty funny. You would set a slew to, I've always heard you want to do it at 70 degrees, exactly opposite the sun. But let's just say the sun came up in the east. So this would say slew to 70 degrees and west. And then it would take a bunch of exposures, fall out of here, turn the tracking off, park, and warm the camera up. So,
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
When you chose wait for time dawn, does it calculate that time?
I believe it does.
The instantly you select it, or if you loaded the same thing tomorrow, would that time change?
That's something I would have to test.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Let me just do a quick test. Yeah.
You probably have to wait till tomorrow to see if the time changes when you load it.
So here's the JSON it created for that sequence. I was curious. Where was that? Oh God, I'll never find it, will I? Let's see, wait for dark and cool camera. So where's the actual, oh, that's the annotation. Yeah, wait for time. Oh, we wanted wait for what? Wait for dusk. That's time. Okay, well, I'm not sure. I'd have to dig into this more. I was hoping it'd be obvious. If it was actually if it put a
you
dusk.
did do a wait for time.
Yeah, I was hoping it would. See what
Like if you saw the word dawn in there, you know it was calculating it on load and not.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Did it inject the actual time? So that might be another thing that you have to watch out for. It may encapsulate this time for this night. So The question would be, if you made it a template and you loaded it in, does it realize it when it loaded, or is it going to use the time you set before? So those are all good questions. I haven't used it enough to hit that yet, but my recommendation is, if you made any script for this, that before the night starts, you just scroll through and review this like you were looking at code, basically. So I'm not advocating this is the way beginners should get started, but for me, it's been handy, because before, if I want to do multiple objects and I wanted to, let's say I want to do an hour and a half of data on each one, or I wanted to do each object for one, however much data I got, just go through RGB repeatedly for an hour and a half and then jump to the next one. And it lets me do that. It lets me do things like just take data until it gets to 40 degrees and then, or the horizon, and then stop. Because I don't know how many exposures, it's going to take until it hits the horizon, but I could just say loop until the altitude goes below, or loop for a time scale. You can do other things. You can say, like, wait. You can wait, wait until the moon is at 20 degrees or something. Now, I don't know why you'd want to wait till it comes up, but you could say, wait until the moon is below 20 degrees before you start imaging LRGB or something, right? Let's see. Yeah, I don't, that one's kind of goofy. So loop until the illumination of the moon is greater than, I don't know if that changes enough in a night to make much sense, but
I think they're just using the same
yeah.
piece of code for the less than greater than.
Or you could do here. This one's probably more interesting. Basically, I want to shoot LRGB until the moon is above 10 degrees, right? And then it would fall out of this loop. And then you could have a next object, which was a narrowband object, that would start imaging. Because when the moon came up, obviously you probably want to switch to narrowband. So there's a lot of flexibility here. I'm not going to claim to cover everything. But this is their first kind of development release that has any of this code in it. So they've already made a lot of progress. I imagine when 1.11 is finally a stable release, I don't know what their timeline will be for that, but I imagine this will be much more fleshed out when they get feedback from people using it. But like I said, I hadn't crashed on me, knock on wood.
Yeah, and it looks pretty slick. I mean, you don't have to start out buying a SGP, for example. You just grab this and.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this kind of GUI programming thing, but it, as I said, they have some built-in templates. Oh God, I got to clear all this out. Well, fortunately, if I clean this container out, most of it's going to go. So there, as I said before, if you let's just say you just wanted to image M42 and you said add it, and this is their built-in sequence that comes packaged with it. And it's documented, so it'll center, rotate, it'll autofocus. I kind of copied this earlier, right? And then this one doesn't use the smart exposure. It just has this, it does 20 300-second exposures, right? And they're telling you here, you could either use this whole container to do it, or you could use smart exposure. So obviously this is probably a little easier than all these instructions. A few other things I noticed: if you don't have any equipment connected and you start, I try to define all this during the daytime, it'll just fill these in with current everywhere because it doesn't know. And then when you load the sequence, it doesn't have any filter information in it yet. So you have to build these up when you're connected so you can actually put in the filter names. If I disconnected the filter wheel and I clicked on that drop down, it wouldn't have anything. It would just say current because it's looking at your current filter to figure out. So, there's things like Voyager that let you do some of this stuff when you're not connected to your equipment. So that's a current limitation. It's you know, it's not too bad. The other thing about this thing is it's actually, while a sequence is running, you could actually go in there and change this number. So if you were, let's say you had accidentally put 300 and then at exposure 10, you're like, I meant to put in 3, and you change that to 3. The next time it finished exposure, it would see the updated dither or loops, and it would execute it. I noticed that because I told some people the other day, I was imaging and I forgot to put a Meridian flip in there, and I was looking at the on this screen here for the telescope. It tells you right here. Well, it's kind of, I'm parked, but here it tells you how long it has to do a Meridian flip. And I was looking at it, it's like, it said 3 minutes. And I was kind of like, wait a second. And I went back here and I had not put in this trigger. So I quickly grabbed it and threw it in there. And then about a minute or two later, it was time to Meridian flip, and it did it. And I didn't have to stop the sequence or anything while it was doing that. It just was kind of do it in real time. So that's kind of, hopefully not something you would use often, but so that's kind of, I think that's a pretty good dive into this. I linked an article, a YouTube in the announcement, another guy. I basically did what he did, but here I was able to show you some of the stuff in real time. Any questions? Anyone want to see me do something else with it, or are we good?
I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I kind of said I'd do it for an hour, and we're coming up on that. So I think I'll stop there. Obviously, if anyone has any questions about this, let me know. It's a lot to take in, and it's going to take me a while to kind of figure everything out, but it's I like playing with this software, so it'll be fun just to play with it. Appreciate everyone coming out. It's still early. If you want to get out there and image the moon or something, you got time. So
Cool.
all right, you guys have a good night.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Yes,
All right.
thanks, Mike.
It's pretty good to see how Nina's coming along.
Yeah, it's moving. It seems to have some legs, so I'm optimistic they're gonna get some good stuff in here.
Yeah. All right.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for doing it. Yep.
Good night. Thanks, Mike.
Bye. Yep.